What is the will to risk?
What is the will to risk? Somebody asked me, do you think anyone can be funny? And I said, I think anyone can be funny. I'm not sure everyone is willing to risk being funny, because the will to risk implies the will to fail. If I try this and it doesn't work, there will be consequences. If my fear of consequence is quite great, then my will to risk is quite low, because the fear of negative consequences, bad outcomes, will keep me from taking chances. As an example, you might be terribly funny and you might want to do stand-up comedy, but you have to have the will to risk to get from the floor to the stage. Even if it's only 6 inches, that's a big step up. And the only way you can take that step is if you can bring your mind around to the idea that this outcome doesn't matter. It might be a bad outcome, it might hurt me emotionally, but for the sake of my goals, it's a step I have to take. And that the whole math of it is, if you have a clear sense of your goals and you can link those goals to actions, then the combination of goal and action will give you the will to risk. Because you will see quite clearly, in order to achieve this goal, I have to take this action. I understand that there's a risk of a possible negative outcome, but I also understand that if I don't take this action, I can't achieve that goal. And that's a known bad outcome. So I fight against theoretical or possible bad outcomes with the knowledge that taking no action is itself an undesirable outcome for me. It won't advance me toward my goals.
Do you think some people have a natural, just sort of like a propensity to be up in front of a crowd? It doesn't, if they fail, if someone throws a tomato at them, it's not the end of the world.
I think some people have that quality naturally. Some people acquire it. A lot of us are, I don't want to say that we're programmed in our youth, but I'll just tell you about my own experience. As a youngest child, youngest of 3, I was counted on to be funny. You know, I was the little one, I was the cute one, and there was a lot of positive reinforcement directed at me for taking comic risks. As a consequence, I grew up feeling pretty comfortable with taking not just comic risks, but creative risks of all kinds. Mostly because I had already acquired some experience in trying some things that work and trying some things that don't work. In my book, The Comic Toolbox, and this is kind of one of the things that I'm known for, I established what's called the rule of 9, which says for every 10 jokes you try, 9 won't work. And you think, well, that's a terrible bad average. I'm only getting it right 1 time out of 10. That's horrible. It's not, because it tells you 2 important things. One is you're going to get it wrong much more often than you get it right. Getting it wrong is the norm. And the other thing is, if you have 10 jokes and you only need 1 to work, then you don't have to invest 100% of your ego in any one joke. You can basically distribute all of your ego across 10 jokes. And any joke that fails only costs you 10% of ego. And then that 1 joke that does work, that's what you need to advance toward your goals. And anytime you advance toward your goals, your ego feels much better. So we can say what falls out from this is, for someone who's operating in creative spaces, we're always operating in an ego space. We're always engaged with, whether we know it or not, engaged with the question of, how does this circumstance make me feel? What I try to do is focus on a different question. How can I use this circumstance to advance toward my goals? I find that if I operate with that question in mind, the fear falls away, the insecurity falls away, the will to risk advances. Because it's clear that no matter what's going to happen, I'm going to gather information and it's going to advance me toward my goals one way or another. So the ultimate outcome of this is, I'm going to do a better job, I'm going to create better products, I'm going to win more acclaim. And it turns out, from moment to moment as writers or creators, we are serving our ego. And the minute we stop serving our ego and serve the work instead, try to make the work as good as it can be, then the work becomes better and better and better. We achieve more, we attain more, and our ego feels that much better. All of which boils down to serve the ego, ignore the ego, and save your ego for the award ceremony.
But they say that most people fear, the biggest fear is public speaking. I'd rather stand up in front of a group of people on a topic I know nothing about and be booed off the stage than, let's say, walk across the Golden Gate Bridge on a windy day, which I've done in a class trip and couldn't make it. So some people have certain fears that seem normal, and public speaking, I guess, is considered a normal fear.
I use a metaphorical structure for my fears. I imagine that the inside of my brain is outer space, and my fears are present in here and there in outer space. They manifest as black holes. They suck all my energy and they warp reality. They do a lot of bad things. And since they're black holes, they feel dangerous to me, so I avoid them. Fear of rejection, let's say, as an example. Or in my case, fear of not hearing adequately. So my experience of this is, if there's a black hole that exists and I don't confront it, then it exists and it dominates. But if there's a black hole that exists and I confront it, doing no more than saying, I acknowledge this black hole, I acknowledge the presence of this fear, that kind of sucks the air out of that balloon. The black hole goes away and I have more freedom of movement in my own mind. That's why I use that metaphor, and that's what I'm attempting to serve. Not to deny my fears or even really make them go away, just to acknowledge their presence and manage them effectively as part of my overall job of being as successful a creative entrepreneur as I can.
What if a writer is afraid they will embarrass themselves, and maybe especially embarrass themselves in front of a group of their peers? Strangers, it's like whatever, but...
Yeah, strangers, it's like whatever, but oh, my mom's in the audience. Or
Marge from accounting.
Or Marge from accounting. Well, Marge from accounting. I'm going to answer your question, but first I'm going to go roundabout with a little bit of story. I was in Prague, in the Czech Republic, doing a comedy writing workshop. And it was a multi-day thing, and I was just getting started. I was midway through the morning on the first day. And I'm at a point in my lecture, and I just lose it. Might have been jet lag, might have been, I don't know, something that I thought I understood very well. I suddenly couldn't make head nor tails of. It was a story structure that I was trying to communicate, and I just found that I couldn't. And I had a kind of a freak out moment. And it wasn't bad, and I acknowledged it. I said to the audience, I said, you guys, let's take 5 minutes. I've lost the plot. I need to find it again. And that was the moment. And we took a break, and I came back and started teaching something else. That night, the whole group went out for drinks and dinner. And my wife was there. She was traveling with me, and she was part of the party. And later she reported to me that she talked to a lot of different students, and they all said the same thing. That moment when he fell apart and acknowledged that he'd fallen apart, that's when he won our allegiance. Because we thought, if that guy can fail, this expert can stand in front of us and fail so visibly and own it and transcend it and move on, that's a big relief to us, because now we're not afraid of failure. We've seen the boss failing, we've seen the maestro failing, and that leaves us free to manifest our own failure. I have since used that over and over again as a strategy. If the room is tough, if people are feeling uptight, they're not ready to take chances yet, I just fail. I fail on purpose. I go someplace crazy. I go out on a limb that I know I'm not going to arrive someplace good, and just crash on purpose so that people can see me modeling failure and feel better about their own failure. Now, back to your question. Can you repeat it, please? Because that was... Tell me again the question that you asked.
Is a writer afraid they will embarrass themselves and embarrass themselves in front of a group of their peers?
Okay.
TV writers' room.
Okay, so there I am embarrassing myself in front of a group of students. Each of them is worried about embarrassing themselves in front of their peers. It's a comedy writing workshop. They're supposed to be funny. Stakes are high. Pressure is high. They're not going to do well. I'm going to instruct them to lower pressure by embracing failure. I always tell people in these circumstances, if you must fail, and you will fail, fail big. If you have a magnificent failure, at least you created something that was magnificent. And if your goal is to fail big, then failure doesn't scare you anymore. But in terms of this idea of, I'm afraid of the negative response of the people around me, I think a lot of that is what I call cartoon emotion. We have emotional states that exist without giving too much thought to them. And the emotional state we're in right now is, people are going to hate me. People who love me will hate me. That's on the bedrock. That's what we're afraid of. If I write this romantic novel, if I write this screenplay, if I do this stand-up comedy routine, and it goes bad, which it will, because I'm a loser, then everybody who loves me will hate me. I'll be that much more of a loser. We can see that this is a lot of kind of self-fulfilling prophecy toward a negative outcome, a vicious circle. We can turn it into a virtuous circle simply by saying, I'm going to have this experience and I'm going to collect this outcome. I'm not going to have expectations on whether it's going to be a good outcome or a bad outcome. Try for a good one, but not marry my ego to a good outcome. And what's going to help me in this is the understanding that people who love me actually love me. They're rooting for a good outcome. And if it happens that I don't get a good outcome, the only one it'll really bother is me, because I'll feel like I'll let them down. They're prepared to give me charity. They're not going to condemn me for trying something that didn't work out. They're on my side. So in the moment where I am attempting the creative act, trying to throw it out the window and see if it lands, I need to remind myself the audience is not in conflict with me. They want the same thing I want, a good outcome, a funny joke, a good story, a good movie experience, whatever. We're all on the same side. We're not against each other. And that also will help me step over that fear barrier and into the experience that I want to have.
So if someone would like to win the empathy or the sympathy of a crowd, should they knock the microphone off the podium for a second and then apologize or drop their papers?
It's a perfectly valid strategy. I've seen stand-up comics trip getting up on stage. It never fails to get a laugh because of what we talked about, slipping on a banana peel in a sense, making yourself the target in a sense. This is stand-up comedy 101, make yourself the target. In my book, The Little Book of Stand-Up, I talk about your first 5 minutes. What are you trying to do with that precious first 5 minutes of comic material that you're trying to generate? One thing you're trying to do is define yourself. Another thing you're trying to do is to build audience allegiance. And you can do both of those things by telling jokes about yourself that matter. I might say, look at me, I haven't had a bad hair day in 25 years. And it's my way of saying, I'm bald, everybody knows you're bald. I don't carry any issues with me about baldness, but I could certainly use the appearance of having those issues to win audience allegiance.